Hey guys, Political Junkie 2414 here, and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be releasing or updating my 2024 Senate prediction for the month of September. It's almost the end of September, and I've been looking to make this video for a couple of weeks. I think last week I really wanted to, but I was really busy, and now I have a little bit more time on my hands. So that being said, um, this is, something that we're going to keep doing every month. We've gotten a lot of, interesting news for some of these Senate elections in the last month or so. And, yeah, a lot of new candidates, a lot of, interesting decisions that we'll be talking about. So, yeah, let's get into it. So we're going to start by filling out the safe Democratic and Republican states. Sorry if my voice sounds a little, actually not New Jersey. We'll talk about New Jersey in a second. Sorry if my voice sounds a little raspy, or not raspy, but just kind of uh, groggy. I've been sick recently, so that is why I'm not sounding 100%. But I feel good enough to make this video. So we have these safe Democratic and Republican states filled out. A couple of these you can contest, like New Mexico and Maine. Maine and Vermont, obviously, have independent senators who caucus with the Democratic Party. Bernie Sanders in Vermont, we don't know if he's going to run. Angus King in Maine is going to run. There's a possibility that's under 15, but either way, I don't really think. I think it will be over 15, and either way, a Democrat is winning that seat technically. And then in Vermont, it's safe blue if Bernie Sanders isn't there, or if he is there, he's technically a Democrat. Really doesn't matter. Minnesota is safe because of Democrats having Amy Klobuchar, who's a really popular incumbent, running there on the ballot in New Mexico. Really hasn't seen a lot of the Republicans really haven't been challenging Martin Heinrich too aggressively. And the good news for Democrats is that in this map that is pretty unfavorable to them, you can see that out of the seats up that they are defending, 20, they're defending 20 Democrats plus, the free independents in Vermont, Maine, and Arizona. But despite this, many of, all but one of their retiring incumbents are in what we would consider, safe states based on this map. And I think most people would say California, Maryland, and Delaware, where three out of the four Democratic incumbents who are retiring are not swing states. They might have interesting primaries like in Maryland and California, but at the end of the day, they're going to a Democrat, and that's the gist. Republicans also have two retirements. Indiana, Mike Braun is running for governor, but Jim Banks he's a congressman. He looks well positioned to hold that seat for the GOP. He really doesn't have any primary opposition. Not going to make for a very interesting race, but of course, noteworthy. Utah, however, Mitt Romney announced that he would not be running for re-election. A bit of a surprise if you ask me, but not stunning. It makes sense why he wanted to retire from, the way that he laid it out. And, I remember when I was making my possible Senate retirements video earlier this year, I had Romney on that list, and it looks like he will be joining that. So Utah will be an interesting primary, but it's a Republican seat. I really don't see, unless a really strong independent challenger like Evan McMullin runs again, or if Democrats, are lucky enough to get a really bad GOP candidate, maybe it could fall to likely, but I highly doubt it. Utah is still a pretty red state. And then in Nebraska, obviously, there are two Senate elections because Senator Ben Sasse retired or resigned this year and handed the seat over to former Governor Pete Ricketts. Didn't hand it over per se, but Ricketts is his successor, Jim Pillen, appointed him to the seat. But either way, Nebraska does seem like it's going to be pretty, safe for the GOP as it usually is. So, with that said, we have 13 states that I would not consider to be safe. So let's start filling them out. We will go with the likely Republican and Democratic states. So the safe states, I think I forgot to mention this. In case you don't know, safe states are basically states that where the incumbent party wins by over 15%, there's really not much consideration into it being a competitive race, but likely is a big range of outcomes, 5 to 15% margins for the incumbent party. So it could be really close to being a competitive state, like a lean state, or it could be very close to being a safe state. And some of these safe states are kind of on the border of being likely, but at the end of the day, not a serious deal. So let's talk about a couple of these. We'll start off with the state of New Jersey for the Democrats, which I would say I'm going to move back down to likely Democrat, and that is because Bob Menendez, if you haven't heard already, the incumbent senator has been indicted for pretty serious crimes. I won't get into them specifically, but his role with him being the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, or at least he was until this past Friday when he was indicted. It you know, using that role um, has, I guess, he used that role to really abuse his power. Him and his wife were both indicted on, counts of committing bribery and trading information with an Egyptian with the Egypt like sensitive national security information with the Egyptian government. And so that has really caused a lot of Democratic representatives in the New Jersey House delegation to uh, call for his resignation. And one of the most prominent, Andy Kim, who's a representative from the third district, has already announced that he is running. Menendez looks like he's going to announce his reelection bid tomorrow. He's been very um, he has this is not the first time that he has been allegedly accused of participating in corruption, but this is pretty much his, compared to his 2015 indictment, this is a whole of a lot more serious. A lot of Democrats are either coming out and calling for his resignation, like Andy Kim or Senator John Fetterman, or just staying completely quiet altogether. But Menendez clearly does not have the same institutional support among the state party that he did last time around, and so I think that I think he's more likely than not to lose. It's more likely than not that he loses the nomination to Andy Kim, which I think would be good for the Democrats in the sense of electability. If you've seen some of my posts, you know how I view the whole situation. So I won't get into that in this video since this is meant to be unbiased. But long story short, I think Menendez would really cost Democrats or would really force Democrats if he was to win the primary, which I don't think he will, but let's say he does. I think that he would have a really not super competitive election. I don't think he'd have a realistic chance of losing because it's a presidential year, but he has a history of underperforming. In 2018, in a blue wave year, which was after his first indictment, which again was nothing compared to this, a more recent one. He only won by 11%. That was lower than 2012 before his corruption charges or that first indictment, I guess. There's been stuff going on with Menendez for a long time, but I think that he would really make the race single digits. It could go down to lean, and maybe in a best case scenario, Republicans could win the seat if Menendez is there, but I don't think he's going to. I think Andy Kim uh, is going to win this primary. I think he's going to do pretty well, and I think he's going to be the next senator from New Jersey. And if and when he does win the primary, I do think I will move this race back up to safe Democratic, unless there is some strong GOP contender. Either way, another likely Democratic state would be Virginia. And Virginia, am very close to putting as safe. Tim Kaine is a really good incumbent, but I don't know if I'd quite say I don't feel super comfortable putting him as in a safe race. Hung Cao, the former nominee for or GOP nominee for Virginia's 10th congressional district, is running for this seat. By the way, Jennifer Wexton, the incumbent congresswoman, is retiring, which surprised a lot of people, including me. We'll talk about that when I make my next House prediction. When that'll probably be soon. I don't have a clear timeline on that. But either way, Hung Cao announced that he will be running for Senate a couple months ago. And I think he's an all right candidate. I think people overhype him. I think a lot of people want Glenn Youngkin to run, but honestly, I don't think he's going to run for Senate. Originally, I was skeptical. I thought that maybe he would, but more recently, I've become pretty doubtful of him running for Senate or the presidency, for that matter. I know a lot of people still think he's going to enter the race late, but honestly, I mean, he's waiting until after the Virginia state midterms to make a decision, and by that point, I mean, he only got a couple months left before the Iowa caucus. So, on that note, I'm getting sidetracked. But Tim Kaine, I think he's a really strong candidate. He's outperformed other down ballot He's outperformed other Democrats on the ballot in the past. In 2018, he won his Senate race by 16 points. He won against George Allen in 2012 by 6 points. He outran Obama here, so he's been a pretty good incumbent. I just don't know if I want to, call it a safe blue race just yet. I'd say he overperforms Biden by just a little bit. He wins by like 13-ish, whereas Biden probably beats Trump in the state by 12. If it's anyone else besides Hung Kao, I'm more confident that in Tim Kaine and it being, I would probably move it to a safe blue race. I don't think there's anything super special about Cao's candidacy, but he's pretty average. I think he'd do decently well against Tim Kaine given the circumstances. And the final likely state that I have, the one that I think is the most competitive out of these three for the Dems, is Pennsylvania. Now, Pennsylvania, on the surface, looks pretty good for the Democrats, and I mean, it is good for the Democrats. Don't get me wrong. I think Bob Casey is a very strong incumbent. He has won 3 elections in a row by no less than 9%. And I think that he's this will probably be his closest election. But Pennsylvania Republicans do have a um, decent chance to make this race competitive. Now, beating Casey, especially in a presidential year where Biden's likely to win Pennsylvania, although I do think he'd underperform Casey, uh, you know, I think the chances of Republicans winning the seat are pretty slim. If they couldn't win, if Dr. Oz, who again I know was a terrible candidate, couldn't beat John Fetterman in an open race last year, I highly doubt how Republicans take out a Senate incumbent like Casey unless something about the national environment really, really, like shifts towards Republicans. Now, David McCormick, who's been rumored to run for the seat for a long time, pretty much ever since he lost the primary to Dr. Oz in 2022, has finally announced. He announced, I think, on a Thursday, last Thursday at the time I'm recording this, on the 24th of September. But I think McCormick is a decent candidate. I think he would have done better than Oz. Would he have beaten Fetterman? I don't know. I think Josh Shapiro's influence or down ballot the benefits of Josh Shapiro winning the governor's race by 15% might have just made it impossible for Republicans to win that Senate seat, or do really well in the congressional races in Pennsylvania. But I do think that McCormick would have done better. I think overall he's a decent candidate, but again, he's running against Bob Casey, who's an institution in the state. I mean, I'll just show you won by 13 in 2018, won by 9 in 2012, won by 17 against an incumbent in 2006. I mean, this guy really, his dad was governor. He's got a bunch of name recognition, got a very strong, um, you know, base. I think he'll do a lot better, or he'll outperform Biden with working class. He'll outperform Biden with the white working class voters and do just generally well for a Democrat in Pennsylvania. I think he's going to be um, you know, I think he's going to do very well. I don't think he'll win by 13. I think he'll win by more like 8 or 9, which would be his worst performance thus far for the Senate seat, depending on, if it goes above the 9.1 margin from 2012, but who knows? I think Pennsylvania, either way, is pretty likely to go to the Democrats. David McCormick is not a phenomenal candidate. He has the same issues as Dr. Oz with carpetbagging, although McCormick is a Pennsylvania native. His family's been in Pennsylvania for a long time, but he's had a lot of connections to Connecticut and not so many to Pennsylvania. He recently bought a house there a couple years ago, right before he announced his Senate campaign. So I think overall he's going to have the same issues. He's pretty much the de facto GOP nominee. This will be an interesting race to watch. I'll tell you. I think Pennsylvania. I would still consider it part of that battleground column, but definitely one of the less competitive ones. I think Casey's pretty favored. I just think it's an interesting race to watch, and it is Pennsylvania, and it's traditionally a pretty Republican or pretty battleground state. So now we're going to go on to the likely GOP states. Florida, it's interesting. I think Democrats aren't like 100% guaranteed to lose this race, but they're pretty close to it. They have a decent candidate in Debbie Murkowski Powell, who's a former congresswoman from Florida, ran in or won in 2018, lost in 2020. But Rick Scott, even though he's not necessarily what I'd call a super great candidate, has a history of winning elections. He was able to knock off Bill Nelson, an incumbent Democrat in 2018. And if Bill Nelson couldn't win in 2018, I don't think he was a phenomenal candidate, but at the same time, he had a pretty good track record. He won in 2012 by 13 points, outpaced Barack Obama in the state by double digits, won in 2006 by 22 points against a statewide elected Republican. I mean, yes, Scott was governor, but still, Florida, I think, is just generally trending right. I don't think it's going to, I think there's, very little chance that it ends up being as Republican as it was in the midterms, but I think Scott wins by around 6 or 7. Does a little bit worse than Trump or whoever the GOP nominee is, whether it be DeSantis, Nikki Haley, Mike Pence, you name it. I think it'll be Trump, though. Missouri, I would call a likely red state. Definitely much more Republican leaning, or a larger margin for Josh Hawley than for in a Missouri than for Rick Scott in Florida. Democrats have some decent recruits. They have Lucas Kunce, a former Navy SEAL, I think, or he's a Marine. But he ran for a Senate last year, didn't win the primary. I think he'd do decently against Josh Hawley. I think he'd win or lose. He would not win. He'd like lose by 12%, but Missouri's a very red state. Again, same deal with Florida with Bill Nelson in Missouri. Claire McCaskill lost to Josh Hawley by 6 points, and she had a history of doing pretty well. She had a really impressive performance in 2012, although again, say what you will about Todd Aiken, he was a pretty bad candidate. Um, so I think overall, Josh Hawley is pretty much guaranteed re-election. I just think he just will not win by over 15. And I think Democrats will pour some money into this race. Will it be for nothing? Probably, most likely. I really doubt Democrats winning Missouri of all places, but who knows? Maybe they could get it down to a single digit margin for Josh Hawley in a best case scenario. And then the final likely state is West Virginia. And this might shock some of you. One, because you might be like, well, why is West Virginia a safe Republican state even in the battleground category? And others might be like, well, a Democratic incumbent, Joe Manchin, is there. And I think that while Manchin, I think a lot of people have counted him out, and said he has no path to victory. And I think that his path to victory is very, very um, it really depends on a lot of things. First of all, we don't even know if he's running. He might run for Senate, or he might run for a president as a third party candidate. I don't think he's going to do that. If he does, um, obviously he's not running for Senate, but he could also just plain retire. He's planned to make his announcement in a couple months. And I think that even if he does run, Republicans had originally Manchin was doing pretty well. He won by 10 points in 2010, over 20 in 2012, doing a lot, while Obama lost the state by over 26 points. And in 2018, in a blue wave environment, a bluer national environment than 2012, I think, Manchin only won by 3 points against, yes, it was against the Attorney General of the state, Patrick Morrisey, who I think a lot of people say was a terrible candidate. I don't think he was that bad, but he was definitely not the best recruit for Republicans. Now they have the governor, Jim Justice, running. They have Alex Mooney, who I think, not a great candidate, but I think Jim Justice is clearly the favorite to win the GOP nomination. And in the polls, you know, Justice is clearly the better candidate, but even then, I don't think that Joe Manchin would beat Alex Mooney. Mooney is not as strong of a candidate. If he does somehow win that primary, which I highly doubt, but let's say he does for the sake of argument, um, I think he would win, by single digits. But again, this is a presidential election year, and Democrats and Republicans are a lot more polarized. Senate elections are a lot more polarized nowadays. And so, even then, Justice could win by over 15 percentage points, even if Manchin runs, and the same for Mooney. I mean, West Virginia is such a Republican state nowadays, and Trump, or whoever the GOP nominee is, I think it's Trump, but it doesn't really matter. We'll win in West Virginia by close to, if not more than, 40 points. Um, but either way, Manchin can only overperform so much. So I think, yes, there's an argument to be made that yes, he's dead on arrival. I think he's pretty close to it, honestly. I think that his performance in 2018 really showed the cracks in his um, ability to win over conservative voters here in West Virginia who have really just turned away from national Democrats, and I think he's going to lose, but again, wouldn't call it safe Republican just yet. Now we're going on to the seven remaining states. These are the most competitive. I apologize for taking a while to get here. Kind of got stuck in those likely states for a little bit. But we have Nevada, Arizona, Montana, Texas, Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Six of these seven have Democratic incumbents. Technically, Arizona has an independent, and Texas has a Republican incumbent. But all these states I would consider to be pretty competitive, and I would consider that these are the ones that are the most that will basically come down to determining control of the Senate. Republicans are at 49 seats. If they win the presidency, they only need one more because they'd have a Republican vice president to break a 50-50 tie. But if Democrats win the presidency, which I think is more likely at this point in time, um, they would just need to get to 50, which would mean they basically have to sweep all but one of these races, and that is a very hard task for them. But let's start. Let's go from. Should we go west to east or east to west? Let's go east to west. Ohio, I would say, goes to the GOP. There is a Democratic incumbent here, Sherrod Brown. He has a history of winning, but again, same with West Virginia. He is really going to have to go up. He's really going to have to outrun Biden in the state. Biden's performance in the state, and while Biden might not get destroyed in Ohio, he might. I think best case scenario he loses it by like six, like a Tim Ryan margin. But more honestly, I think to be honest, I think he's more likely to lose it by 8 to 10, and that puts Brown in a really tough position because he has to overperform by close to, if not 10 points, or potentially more if Biden really collapses in Ohio, which is a possibility. I mean, it's a very right trending state, and Democrats really have struggled there. And I think while Brown, no matter what, is going to make this race competitive, worst case scenario, I see Brown losing by five if like Biden just loses the state by like 15, which won't happen. I really doubt it. I don't think Ohio is that right trending, but that's like the worst case scenario, I would say, for Brown. Best case scenario is he wins by like three. And Republicans they don't have the best candidates. Frank LaRose, I think, not the best, kind of an Adam Laxalt type where he's a statewide official, or in Laxalt's case, he was a former statewide official, got a lot of hype for his campaign, was really made out to be this one candidate who could beat Catherine Cortez Masto, and then lost the race. Now, I don't think Laxalt was nearly as bad as, say, like Blake Masters or Herschel Walker or Dr. Oz, but he was still not that great. I think LaRose supporting the excuse me, I'll be right back. Sorry about that. Yeah, I just had to deal with something. But where was I? I guess I was saying Frank LaRose supporting the Ohio Issue 1 referendum, which was really tied to pro-life, really supported by pro-life groups, will hurt him because that did really fail to pass. And, taking anti-abortion stances since Roe v. Wade's overturning has proven to be a pretty unpopular position with swing voters. And I think that, against Brown, who's already going to outperform Biden with working class voters that I think just do better in general as a Democrat in Ohio, I think that really gives, um, That really puts LaRose, who I think will be the nominee, in a tough position. If it's Matt Dolan, I think a lot of people think he's terrible and that he wouldn't get out the Trump base. I think he'd be able to win, maybe a little bit better than LaRose. Bernie Moreno, I think, is the worst of the free. While he is the most Trumpy, which is, decent for a candidate in Ohio, he's very toxic to the suburbs, which have been trending Democratic. Like in the Cincinnati area and in the Columbus area. And I think that overall, when you're running against someone like Brown, you really need Republicans really need to put up a really good candidate to win because Brown's going to overperform anyway, and so you want to be able to hold on to as many voters as you can. And I think that right now, Ohio, just the polarization of it on the presidential level is going to drag Brown down against someone like LaRose. But I could even see Brown winning. And I think that would really help Democrats winning. Help Democrats maintain control of the Senate. It's definitely not a lost cause, and I think Tim Ryan's performance in 2022 wasn't spectacular, but it was pretty good given the circumstances. And Republicans, the reason why he lost by 6 was because he Republicans just had to pour so much money in there, and that made them unable to focus on other states like Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, Pennsylvania that were more competitive. It was really, a distraction for the GOP. And so now Republicans are at 50. Again, I think Democrats are going to win the presidency, so that technically doesn't mean uh, that Republicans have won the Senate at this point. But I'm going to give Michigan and Wisconsin to the Democrats. Wisconsin, I did consider putting as a likely state, and I can see why some people have. But while Tammy Baldwin is a very strong candidate, I don't think she's unbeatable, but I don't think she's super weak. I'm kind of Baldwin has a lot of um there are a lot of people who think Baldwin is just a terrible candidate and a lot of people who think she's a great candidate, and I'm kind of in the middle. But I think right now she's looking at a really, really solid, or she should be really confident about her chances. I've had her favored the whole time. I think her biggest challenger, potential challenger was Mike Gallagher, who I don't think would have beaten her, but would have made the race a lot closer than, would have made it her closest race. Um, and he decided not to run. Then it was Tom Tiffany, who was the, presumed number one candidate for Republicans. He decided to run for reelection to the House. And now they're kind of in a weird position where they have David Clark, who is a former Democrat. He was the sheriff of Milwaukee County. He's become very right wing, and it looks like he's going to be the candidate. And I think that Biden wins Wisconsin by like 2, and Baldwin wins by like just underneath 5. It could be likely, but I just don't want to I feel like putting it as likely is a bit, of a bold move right now. I want to see some more data. I want to see how things go in Wisconsin before I make that decision. Michigan Democrats do have a retiring incumbent, Debbie Stabenow, but they're doing pretty well. It seems like they had a deep bench of candidates, and most of them, it's not a very divided primary. There's Hill Harper, who was, is an actor, been on CSI and The Good Doctor. But I would say the establishment candidate, or at least the more establishment candidate, is the Congresswoman Elisa Slotkin, who I think is favored to win the primary. I think she'd be a decent candidate. Again, um she's not invincible by any means. She's not a world beater, but I think she'd be pretty good. I think she'd run even with Biden, and I think she is right now favored to be the Democratic nominee. Republicans have finally started to get some people to jump into the race. Mike Rogers, a former congressman, has decided to run in after the NRSC basically convinced him to enter in. Peter Meyer, former congressman who voted to convict Trump, you might remember him from losing his primary last year. And then James Craig, who looks like he's going to announce, sometime soon in either late September or early October. But he's been very clear that he really does think he's going to run. He just hasn't made an announcement yet. And Bill Huizenga is also in there. But again, Michigan is just the GOP in Michigan the state party is just really bankrupt honestly, and they really have had a bad select. They had a really bad performance last year with the candidates they chose. They lost the governor's race by over 10 points, lost the attorney general race by nearly 10 points, and I think they lost the Secretary of State race by double digits. It was really bad for Republicans, and I think that Michigan is a lean Democratic state in this scenario. I think on the surface, Stabenow's retirement isn't great for Democrats, but again, she also wasn't necessarily the best candidate. She did kind of underperform Tammy Baldwin and Bob Casey, despite Michigan usually being considered of these free states that voted for both Biden and Trump in the last two elections, or voted for Trump and then Biden. Michigan's usually considered the bluest, but yet Stabenow won by the least out of these three. Um, but then again, I think that Michigan stays blue. I think that Slotkin wins by around 5 against. I think James Craig will be the nominee. I could see it being Rogers or Peter Meyer. I don't know about Peter Meyer, though. He'd have a really hard time getting past the primary. Maybe Bill Huizenga, but I don't think he's going to run. But either way, I think Michigan is a state where Democrats really should be looking up. But again, it is not safe by any means. And then I'm going to give the GOP the majority with Texas. Texas is a state where Democrats have been doing very well recently. Ted Cruz is not popular, and I do think that he does present a lot of problems for Republicans. He will probably, I think he'll underperform Trump, but Democrats were always going to be at least somewhat competitive in this race. That now they have Colin Allred, the congressman from Dallas running. He looks to be their front runner. He's a pretty strong candidate. I think that Democrats are sort of moving on from Beto O'Rourke being the candidate they run for everything. I'm sure Beto will run for something in the future, but Allred I think is a pretty good candidate. However, excuse me, um, I think Allred's a pretty good candidate. However, Texas is still a red state. I think Trump is still favored to win it by a couple points on the presidential level, and I think Cruz will do slightly worse to about the same as him. Allred's got a good message. I think he's going to run a very strong campaign. He's been a pretty good. He's raised a lot of money so far, but I still don't want to bet on Blue Texas yet. So yeah, I'd say Cruz wins by like 3 points. Now we're getting on to these free states. So Republicans have already won the Senate, regardless of how the presidency goes. But we're going to fill out these last free states. First, we're going to go to Montana, where I do think Democrats are favored. And you might be saying, well, wait, Montana's a red state, and you already said Ohio and West Virginia are going to kick out their Democratic incumbents. What's different about this? Well, Jon Tester's had a much more consistent margin of victory. He has won very narrow races before where the GOP has really gone after him. West Virginia, Manchin only had really one competitive race that was really competitive. 2010 was technically competitive for him, but still. And Sherrod Brown, while he did have a decently competitive race in 2012 and 2018, still wasn't really that close. I think Montana is different. Tester has more experience, and also it's a state that is more keen to splitting its ticket. I think that there's a lot of evidence to suggest that Jon Tester has won free terms before. He's probably the strongest incumbent out of these free, and Republicans have been trying to get Tim Sheehy, who's the more establishment candidate, to run and basically are discouraging Matt Rosendale, who's a member of the Freedom Caucus in the House, was the Senate nominee in 2018 and lost to Tester. They don't want him to run, but it looks like he's going to, and I think Rosendale, honestly, he has more. If you look at the polling, he just has more support. Even if he doesn't get the Trump endorsement, he is more well known. He represents most of the state. His district covers most of the state in Congress. He also, before redistricting, represented the at-large district, and I think he's not a great candidate. Now, can Republicans just win this race? Is there a chance the Republicans just win this race because of polarization and Tester just loses because it's a presidential year and Trump's going to win the state by at least like 10-ish points? Yes, he could do that, but I think Tester right now is in a good position. Trump's candidates didn't do too well in Montana last year, and I think overall Tester right now is favored to win re-election. I gotta hurry up with this. I'm sorry. This video is a lot longer than I intended it to be. Arizona. This is an interesting race. I'm gonna put it as lean D. Whoops. Kyrsten Sinema is the independent incumbent who hasn't announced if she's gonna run yet. I think she will, but I think there's a chance that she doesn't. Ruben Gallego is the Democratic frontrunner, and there's a lot of concern that with Sinema becoming an independent, and there still is, there's a lot of concern about Sinema becoming an independent and running in this race and splitting the Democratic vote, and that would help get a Republican elected. And I think that that is a valid concern. But if you look at the polling, which again, polling isn't everything, I don't want to, the polls in Ohio right now show Sherrod Brown up by a lot. But if you look at these polls, originally they were showing, Carrie Lake, the former gubernatorial nominee last year, who's expected to announce soon that she's running. They show Carrie Lake originally that she was winning in a freeway race. But now, as more and more polls have come out, it actually looks like Kirsten Sinema has been taking votes away from both Democrats and Republicans. And I think that that is true. I think overall she takes away more from Democrats than Republicans just because I mean, she's a former Democrat. She's more liberal than she is conservative. Even if you don't like how conservative she is, I think that that's just pretty much, that's just pretty much the deal, is that she's not more conservative than liberal. But you can see she's getting like second place, and I don't think she's going to get second place, but I think that she's going to get, maximum 15% of the vote. I think right now she's getting like 10-ish percent, and maybe like 7 of that comes from Gallego, and 3 of that, comes from Lake. But overall, like, Lake, if you're imagining a one-on-one matchup between Gallego and Lake, I think Gallego wins by like 5. And you take those percentages in like a Sinema race, and again, I'm not saying this is guaranteed to happen, but basically what I'm trying to say is, even though more Democrats would vote for Sinema than Republicans or Democratic leaning voters, Gallego would still win, and I think he wins by like 2 right now. Does slightly worse than Biden just because of the freeway race mechanism, but I think Carrie Lake is honestly a really bad candidate. Blake Masters, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think Blake Masters, who looked like he was going to get in the Senate race, kind of walked it back a little bit. It looks like he might run. I think that he would honestly be a better candidate for this race because he conceded his election, even though he did so much worse than Lake did last year. But overall, I think Arizona is leaning Democratic. I think Gallego is the favorite, in a free with Sinema on the ballot or not. And then the final state I would say is Nevada. Jackie Rosen, I think, is guaranteed, or not guaranteed. None of these calls are guaranteed. I think she is favored to win re-election, and I think that she is. I'm pretty comfortable saying that. Obviously not guaranteed. None of these battleground states are guaranteed. But I think Nevada, while you can make a case that it's trending right, it's not trending right enough, and Democrats have had a decently, they have been able to stay stable in the state. Republicans have a crowded primary. They have Sam Brown, a former veteran who's gotten the establishment support. He's got Steve Daines, the chair of the NRSC's support. Then you have people like Jim Marchant, who's an election denier, was the Republican nominee for Secretary of State last year and lost by a lot. And it looks like, honestly, I know a lot of people think Brown is going to be the nominee. I think it's going to be Jim Marchant, but either way, I think Republicans do still lose Nevada. I think Rosen's a pretty strong incumbent, not as good as Catherine Cortez Masto, but she'll have a better environment, better turnout in a presidential year. And I think while Brown would be a decent candidate, in his own right, I think he would do all right. But I think either way, Republicans do lose this seat just because of their continuous inability to really get over the hump in Nevada. They got really close last year in the Senate race. They were able to win the governor's race but by less than expected. So that is where I stand on Nevada. I think Jackie Rosen wins by like 2 to 3. So after that, apologies for how long this video was, but Republicans in this prediction would win 51 seats, flipping Ohio and West Virginia, while Democrats win 49, holding on the competitive seats like, in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Montana, Arizona, Nevada, and Republicans hold on to competitive seats in Texas and Florida. You know, competitive in quotation marks for Florida. But anyways, this is pretty similar to how my predictions have been for the last couple of months. Obviously a couple of rating changes here or there, but we're still pretty early on. So let me know what you guys think. Do you think that Democrats are favored to win the Senate? Do you think Republicans are? Do you also think Republicans are favored to win the Senate? Let me know how you think the Senate map is going to go down. I will be checking the comments to see what you guys say. If you like the video, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications. Check out my non-political channel, Interactor127, and just check out my videos in general. I think if you're really interested in politics, you'll really appreciate a lot of the content that I have to give out. I try to be as unbiased as possible. Although if you look more deep into what I've said, you can probably guess what side I'm affiliated with, but I try to make my predictions and my analyses as unbiased as possible in most cases. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys next time when I talk about all things politics. See ya!